right, folks. So this is the bracket that we're working with here. To kind of explain how this is going to work, uh, every player, this is double elimination. So every player is going to need 2 wins out of their 2 to 3 matches in day 1 to advance to day 2. The wins are counted just as the top 2 players in each round. So round 2 of this is going to be the 2 winners from each of the first rounds playing off against each other, and then the 2 losers from each of the previous rounds playing off against each other. The second loss in that elimination round will knock you out. Then the final round of each group will be the 2 losers from the winners playoffs and the 2 winners from the elimination round. So each of those will be the 4 players with a 1-1 record. The win there will send you into day 2, and a loss there will knock you out. And that will be exactly the same for Group B, which we'll get to later on. All right, and we are off to the races. I don't know if I still have Narninian here, but I assume we do. I guess I will just be on it for now. So looks like we have Primordium with Torch. So we're on Plink Torch, which is really interesting. There's a vent there, so a lot of room for players to actually do some things with magic power, but also set up for these Plinks. Plink can be a really clunky card. A lot of people like to complain about it. I think there's a lot more you can do with Plink that involves just making sure that you have ways to get some of those units that have more than 1 health down to 1 health. And the torches and vents certainly help you do that, though vent can be a little clunky with it. These tempered talismans actually not looking too bad. I see players taking the Pyre Wall to try and avoid any issues that you might encounter with small amounts of damage early, especially when you start talking about things like Mark of Invasion. The real issue is that Pyre Wall is not scaling into the late game. A lot of the things that are going to hit you late game are going to be shard enhanced enemies that appear in the first wave, and you're going to really struggle against those. Pyre Wall is not going to block enough damage, so you're going to need something a little more powerful. Now, the Pyre Wall artifact draft was not anything incredible, but I'm interested to see these 2 copies of Collection of Tales over Tempered Talisman, and then also this Cheater's Hand from Heart feels like a card, or feels like an artifact that's going to eat up a lot of your time, but also just not give you that much increased ability to deal with things. I'm curious what the idea is with it. Obviously, you could try to set up some kind of combo decks, or float Plinks for turns when they're really useful, but I'm not sure that that's as good a value as having all of your Plinks and your vents and your torches be powered up. The Collection of Tales is a little more interesting because you could go for some kind of superfood path with Primordium, buff them up with a bunch of rage, and do something absolutely insane. Yo, thanks for the subject. Help you avoid the ads as you're popping in and out of the tournament here. So, hoping you guys can still hear me as well. Yeah, it appears like my audio is still good. So I'm also curious to see what kind of paths people go with Primordium. Obviously, people aren't really big on buffet, but I think superfood can be really risky here. Hey, Narninian.
I was talking the whole time and you couldn't hear me?
Nope.
That's frustrating. All right,
yeah.
So superfood versus aggressive here, that's kind of a tough call. With it being all that sap in there. What would you choose?
I think I'd lean... So that's tricky. I think superfood's going to help you out a lot more early on. Or not superfood, sorry, aggressive edible. But I think superfood is really the one that helps you do busted things in late game, give you fights where you're absolutely not worried about relentless and you can just focus on pre-clearing waves. I think I'd lean towards superfood for the busted power level potential. But it feels risky. It's also a tougher one to play really fast out the gate. Now, another strategy that superfood really kind of enables, though it seems to work very weirdly with, is actually Umbra drain strategies. Just putting yourself down
right,
to no Ember every turn. Power that thing up.
Of production.
Yep, there's apparels. There's also an immortal trade. Some really interesting strategies here.
To restart on ring 1. It's a rough start here.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what he ended up on here, what kind of led him to that situation. Now, Narninian, since the folks couldn't hear you before, what's your take on this second artifact draft, the Collection of Tales, Cheater's Hand, Tempered Talisman? Because I was thinking the Tempered Talisman was fine. The Collection of Tales is a close second, but has good potential. But the Cheater's Hand coming out from Heart is really interesting.
I like Collection of Tales if I'm going the superfood route. Otherwise, I think as annoying as it is, and in the tournament setting, it might be a factor. I think Cheater's Hand is probably a little bit stronger just to have that situational card that you might need to have on specific turn.
So for me, Tempered Talisman, when you're starting out with the deck with 5 planks, 5 torches, and also 2 copies of Vent, seems really, really strong. I think I would have leaned towards the Tempered Talisman.
True. It is very good.
Now, one thing that we haven't seen in tournaments before, because it's the first post-Divinity tournament, I'm very curious to see how players interact with planks as they go through the run, because planks are actually a really considerable thing to power up with Divine Temples. I think it seems like a bit of a meme to people, or like it's kind of a marginal way to just make your starter card scale into the late game. But having enhanced planks, especially with piercing, can be really powerful.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So we got our first death right now.
Oh, nope. Kachua's squeezing by.
Kachua. Oh, he made it. He made it through, but he almost died.
Yeah, that's a close fight. He ended up losing his kill floor, and then he couldn't actually just like cobble to get together something to eat up the lifesteal stacks from the boss. Lifesteal tough on a boss when your damage isn't too chunky, which you would expect this deck to have some chunkier damage, but it just didn't manifest. I do like these Alpha Fiends here. I think Alpha Fiend has one of the most insane essences to play around with.
Yeah, but its capacity is a real problem. They have Crucible Extension, though.
Yeah, so there's the question of, do you take the Alpha Fiend for its essence because its essence is very strong and try to put it on something a little smaller, a little more flexible later? Or do you just go ahead and power it up? I think actually what we might see here is a play very similar to what we saw coming out of a couple players in the last tournament, which is making a short-term investment with some of your Merchants of Steel enhancements to have a strong unit, like we saw with a lot of Nameless Sirens in the last tournament, but then accepting that you're going to abandon that unit. In this case, rather than purging it, you throw its essence onto something. So maybe 1 or 2 enhancements on the Alpha Fiend, and then putting its essence onto something else if you see something like an Alloy Construct could be fine. So another thing to consider really heavily as we're going through this, this being a Divinity and Shard heavy run, how are you going to have Primordium deal with spikes? Primordium, not the biggest fan of spikes, and a lot of these, like obviously with the trial here, which is spikes 3, but you'll run into a lot of Shard enhancements that are somewhere in the realm of spikes 3, spikes 4. If you can't pre-clear those waves, you're going to have a big problem. And honestly, neither Hellhorned nor Umbra known very well for pre-clearing waves.
Oh man, Apex Imp with Superfood and Perils of Production seem pretty strong.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to have that much experience with the Imp, but it's going to work very well for the players that end up on this Collection of Tales here. I think we're going to see pretty large divides in how in the approaches to which artifacts to draft from these players as we go through these runs. Like obviously some of these drafts are a little more straightforward. The Pyre Wall and the Precious Plating weren't really up against much. But once you're already on something like Tempered Talisman or Collection of Tales, that influences the other artifacts you want to take, which is really going to diverge how these runs play out.
Yeah, seeing a ritual battle for those that took Superfood and Collection of Tales, really, especially with that Apex Imp, seems like a potential real strong deck.
Yeah, now Ritual Battle, the one thing that reminds me of, not going to be as relevant here where we're worried about space, but we're going to have a large theme today and tomorrow of talking about really impactful essences. And I think one of the big ones to look out for with this combo, and especially with this Collection of Tales, are copies of Fledgling Imp. We've already passed by the opportunities for those now, but Fledgling Imp Essence is going to be, I think, a real big impact on this tournament when it pops up. You can get this just massive 1 mana Ritual of Battle your entire floor every single turn setup with a Fledgling Imp on a Fledgling Imp. It's kind of insane. So it looks like we have a lot of players leaning towards the Ember Drain setup. Once you've dug into it, you have to dig into it hard, at least as far as individual fights go. You can't kind of half play Ember Drain once you've put it on a superfood.
Well, yes, but you can, if you can get morsels, you can, play those cards and not get Ember Drain. So I haven't seen Holdover yet, which would really make it much more solid.
Yeah, a big combo that we saw a lot in the qualifying rounds for those that made content on the qualifying rounds was actually Holdover Spell Chain Perils of Production, generating a lot of value.
Yeah, I've had a lot of value in that as well. It's basically 5 Ember without taking an Ember artifact, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, and the fact that the first one guarantees the play of the second one is very important. So one thing to talk about also with Divinity that we haven't got to talk about in tournament setting before, Umbra always had a problem with going wide, clearing really like waves that spread themselves because it doesn't have a lot of backline damage, it doesn't have a lot of pre-clear, and it doesn't have an insane number of individual strikes on cards. Also, you're playing morsels, so you don't get to have a high number of strikes on your floor because you can't afford to fill up your capacity with other banner units. So that's a problem that was already an issue for Umbra and now is even more exacerbated by the existence of Divinity and Shard enhanced waves. A lot of these waves not only go tall, but go a lot wider than any waves did in the game at all before. So I'm curious to see how Umbra does.
They do have the best card for it, which is Furnace Tap, especially with Superfood. But of course, you have to get it. So Peanut Jug having to restart Ring 3. See how the others fare. Looks like Ka is able to do it, recovering well from his first ring disaster. Both Ka and Dusk are getting a flawless ring, and there's Furnace Tap. So you're up against Wretch, though, so it's a tough decision.
Oh, wow, that Deranged Brute. Honestly, if this is me, I consider a full kind of pivot here into Deranged Brute, Enhance It, Dupe It. It's not going to be your only floor. I think you go for a 2-floor setup here. But double Deranged Brute with Collection of Tails and a Perils of Production setup seems kind of insane.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a way to actually get flying kills, deal with enhanced mini-bosses in Divinity Fight, deal with enhanced Gilded Wings. It seems powerful. It's very risky because you're going to have to take another banner unit right now and hope you can filter the other ones out or put their essences on things and trim down your deck. I think the ideal setup here is a top floor that's like your kind of kill floor, and that involves your Primordium plus your 1 Gorging unit, and then a middle or bottom floor with double Deranged Root. Even if you're not trying to keep it around, you try to soften up waves a little bit.
It's tough to keep them alive, though, against the Temperament.
Now, we are going to have to discuss defensive, long-term defensive plans here, especially when you start talking about, flying bosses that can attack you. Talos not doing an insane amount here because players aren't going way too shard-heavy. Aside from Heart. But when we start talking about, Divinity and even potentially, I guess I didn't see what the other boss was. The other
Blight, Scourgefell.
Scourgefell, okay. So we aren't having to deal with that many flying attackers here. No Seraph the Patient this time. But when you start talking about Divinity, you're going to need a solid defensive plan that actually scales. And a lot of what we have right now are hoping for random morsels that work out, or just relying on big health numbers. Yeah,
there is a lifesteal in there.
So that was the interesting point I was going to make, was this Immortal trade, I think, needs to be a key part of the game plan unless you're relying on picking some kind of defensive scaling up. I think that's going to be your relentless killer.
There is some armor. There is some armor based stuff with the Welder Helper.
So now a question of how do we get the welder helper to die? Because you won't be able to put a welder helper essence on a welder helper and then torch it. It's going to have too much armor. So how to get rid of your own welder helper?
Torch. Yeah, unless you have a super torch.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do get a flawless kill from Peanut Jack, but it does not count since he had to restart.
Interesting. He went for the wretch there instead of the furnace tap. I think that's actually very interesting because Peanut Jack is also the player who's really he's on this immortal trade. I think I would have liked to see him just go full Ember Drain here, just commit.
Yeah, I mean, lifesteal and multi-strike don't really synergize, but like you just get holdover lifesteal hopefully, and you don't need it to give you sustain. You just need to stay alive for the next turn.
Yeah, and at the very least, that lifesteal is still doing what you need it to do for one cycle of combat, which will keep you alive for the entire fight. I think that's a missed opportunity here. I think he's thinking about, well, he's looking at essences now. Maybe thinking about doing something with the Horned Warrior essence here. No, goes for Shadow Siege. That seems ambitious. I guess if you shift away from a superfood plan, maybe you can do something with it.
So Hart getting another flawless kill on Ring 4. And it looks like, he's the only one completing Ring 4. Scoring this is hard to keep up.
Yeah, you should have seen last time when I had to write down every single like number and also like look at the screen to see what the digits were. That was a tough one. Dude, the Shadow Siege Confucius? Yeah, I don't know what to make of that.
Ka has to restart again on Ring 4, I believe.
Yeah, it's having a rough time of this one. I'm not sure. Like we definitely have a lot of players who are spread pretty wide on their banner units. I think they're going to end up on 2-floor setups, but there is definitely a certain amount of draw order dependency here.
Yeah, and part of it is just people are taking units for their essences and haven't confused them yet, which for long term is good, fine, but in the short term, draw order can screw you.
Yeah, in the case of Rising Dusk and Kachua, I think that ended up being they didn't want to dip into Red Threat because they had the opportunity to put those essences on. I think they're trying to hold out or figure out what direction they want to go with it based on which units they can upgrade and what type of upgrades they get. But it feels a little too waffly. It feels like you're going to end up costing yourself between now and the point at which you're forced to make that decision just by having too many priority units to draw. So I like Alloy Construct Essence here a lot. Usually you'd want to throw that onto another Alloy Construct because right now you are risking having the unit that you put this on be stuck with inert and not being able to fuel it, especially when you're dealing with so many different units, so many different priority units. It can be tough to get the fuel into that deranged group fast if that's what he's going to go for. So I guess we're about to find out how Kachua's reroll of this fight went. Looks like he's a little light on fuel, honestly. I couldn't see it too well.
Yeah, with no morsel generation besides the champ, it's tough to make a construct work.
Yeah, he's only got 2 fuel, and one of them's gone now. So I think that alloy construct just ends up being a big wall here, and you just have to furnace tap the Alpha Fiend.
The Alpha Fiend, although I mean, you might still furnace tap. It's 96 damage to furnace tap the construct.
Like he's going to be scraping by, a little bit of damage taken.
All right, so he makes it through with only 15 damage. Not too bad. I mean, 15 or 50 is the same thing for the score, but it's not too bad.
Yeah, sometimes that alloy construct turns into just a massive paperweight on top floor. Especially when you're working with plinks and no copies of things like Making of a Morsel or Grovel. I'm actually really curious. So we saw a couple players go for Wretch instead of Furnace Tap. I'm curious to see how that plays out, given how problematic morsel generation has seemed here. Also, the
Yeah,
fact that a lot of them are trying to fuel 2 floors.
Yeah, I don't really see a lot of synergy between Wretch and Superfood. Like, you want Stalwart Snack, really, but you're not guaranteed to get it.
Now we have Hart here, struggling a little bit health wise, but has put himself in a really good position with the power level of his deck. I think he's run into a bit of a problem with his high shard level, making him have like at least some scary moments. He's made it through so far.
And he's got a holdover. You were talking earlier about how to get rid of your imps. He's got a holdover important work and a welder helper. So that's one way to do it.
That is very true. That's also depending on the order in which you can deploy those alongside your Ember Drain plan. That can actually help. That can actually help out some kind of like deep Ember Drain plan. Keep up its mana, and he's leaned really hard into these perils of production. I think Hart's going full Ember Drain here.
Yeah, makes sense.
He's also on the upgraded planks, like we were talking about before, just throwing magic power on those every time he got a chance to. Just making sure that he can consistently generate morsels, but also having ways to at least somewhat pre-clear waves early on in fights. That's going to be a bit more of a problem once you start talking about Divinity, just because Divinity is going to eat up a lot of those plink hits. Always a scary time playing plinks against any wide wave, but when you have a floating boss that's on every floor, there's just no way you can rely on plink. Oh, so we saw
so many more.
We saw Peanut Jack hovering over Pyre Chomper for a little bit. I think he's currently thinking about the important work, but maybe was considering a big mana strategy for a little bit there. Decides to pass. He didn't have any other payoffs or setup for it. Whoa, Kachua taking another big hit, and he's got probably another massive link coming up. That enhanced overcharge tank middle floor gives armor to every other thing on the floor. That thing's an absolute monster. And even on top of that, like if he gets enough power to clear these waves, he's actually running into a little bit of a defensive problem as well. This Allo construct doesn't have a way to heal right now. I think Kachua might be in a rough spot.
Yeah, with only 7 pyre health to spare, he can't afford to. Yeah, right now this wave's killing him. Okay, pulls it out.
Yeah, he just barely gets there. You have to consider, like, he ended up having the kill on the overcharge tank after the furnace tap, but armor being applied to every single enemy left him only like 10 or 15 damage over the line of being able to actually get to the overcharge tank.
I would have considered playing that Alpha Fiend just to block.
Oh yeah, just throw it in front. I'm not sure if it would actually die. That's one issue you have to worry about because you do have to keep the construct fed. Looks like he pulls it out, but it was a tight fight for Kachua there.
So he finishes with 75 damage. Double summon, though. That's not bad. Gets
5. Scourge Fell is going to be the actual scourge of points-based strategies here.
Pain in the butt, yeah. Well, I think you just have to accept that you're not going to get a flawless kill.
Yeah, at the very least now, since we aren't going by the in-game score, you can afford to take more damage and not have to worry about the gradient that is, what percentage of damage you're taking. It's really just a matter of did you take it or did you not. And once you accept that you're taking damage, you can start using your health as a resource for that fight, and then just make yourself concerned about it again later. Now, you would think that a lot of these decks, given that we have an insane number of Ember Drain decks, would actually be pretty prepared to deal with the Scourges. A lot of that just came down to how fast they drew their perils. And in the case of Hart here, he just drew his first copy of perils a little too late. Now we get to see how Rising Dusk is going to deal with enhanced overcharge tanks. I think he's going to be fine. He got a nice pre-clear on the first one. Also, this melee weakness doing a lot of work. His big problem right now is a lack of rage. Just barely getting there on that overcharge tank. I actually had to kill with Primordium. I think the imp strategies are going to be extremely strong here, and it supplements the Ember Drain decks pretty well. The thing is, we started seeing these imps a little late, so there's going to be a big skill test here for how well players are able to kind of transition to this hybrid imp-based deck. We see the Ashes down here for Kachua. That can be absolutely insane, but he needs good imps with preferably other imp essences on them. He needs Endless, and he needs a good way to get them out of his hand. And I think we see between the players a mixture of all of these things, but no one really putting together the full imp strategy yet.
Double Rage. Man, I would be tempted by that Double Rage.
Oh, there's a Gurg's Goad in this as well. I don't mind the Gurg's Goad from Heart. I didn't see... I'm curious what units he's
people
on.
People have Alpha Fiends for the most part. So Peanut Jack finishes Ring 5 with a flawless victory.
Oh yeah, Heart is on the Apex Imp strat. That's his kill floor. So that Gurg's Goad's actually going to do some work. Counts as both a demon and an imp.
I always forget that's a demon too.
Gotta love that double creature type. So it looks like Rising Dusk has got himself into a position where his mortal generation's pretty consistent. Not as much going on for Peanut Jack, who is our other Wretch player. Definitely managed making it by, but a lot of that's a result of his 2-floor split. Now this Shadow Siege Essence on Alpha Fiend has made this thing into an absolute monster. He hovered over a large stone there for a second, but I think we all see the problem with that.
5 damage short of a flawless victory on Dusk here.
Now, Dusk already has a lot of morsel generation, but I kind of like this Grovel in general. Cave-In, not as important now that we aren't worried about lower floor kills. Cave-In's still a very strong card. Can do some insane things.
Yeah.
Help plug up leaks, but it's tough for him to set up on a lower floor.
It could help you enable a flying kill, but I don't see these decks being flying kills.
Nah, definitely not. Maybe with a double deranged root setup, which he might be able to get into here, you might be able to get a flying kill. But even then, like, Cave-In isn't the same as a lot of your other pre-clearing for setting up flying kills. Something like a Siren Song will shift enemy units out of the way and let you hit, Seraphel or Divinity on the floor without shifting around your kill floor as well. But often what will happen with Cave-In is that you're also just moving the wave that you weren't able to pre-clear, and it's still going to be sitting in front of the boss.
So Cog gets a flawless Ring 6, which is pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, I think his deck has a lot of potential. I mean, now he's on Forever Flame. He's definitely in the best position to make a big imp deck here. Double summon, Forever Flame. I'm curious what his imp package is right now. He was one of the players that was on the Welder Helper, but now he's got this Shroud Spike. Has he already passed the all of the ability to get Pyre Chomper? Because he could have actually had a combo deck here. I mean, if you just imagine the Umbra Spike alongside an Endless Pyre Chomper with double triggers and Forever Flame, that's insane. Now we see players also not going too lean in general. Actually, a decent amount of removals from the right 2 players on the screen. But we haven't seen any insane decks going down to, 15 or 16 cards today. It's a tough thing to set up in these time constraints.
Yeah.
It's tough to plan around. There's a lot of methodical thinking that goes into building your really, really lean decks.
Well, it also is a lot of risk, right? So it often involves not drafting cards, and um, that's risky.
Oh, have you seen? We have Rising Dusk on taking advantage of one of the weirdest wordings I think on a Monster Train card in the game, which
Oh,
is
what's
Alpha
that?
Fiend Essence on a Shadow Eater because he technically strikes
Oh, when he
when he
really,
when he gorges. He technically strikes. Yeah.
that is bizarre.
So we've seen it pretty commonly with a Rail Beater. If you put a Rail Beater Essence on Shadow Eater, then he'll actually apply melee weakness. But yeah, he can do some pretty insane things with Alpha Fiend. Still a little tough. That's probably mostly just going to be his, soften up waves type floor. But that thing grows extremely fast.
One thing I'm noticing is, in general, a much higher shard count for this match than the previous. Everyone above what they need, except for Dusk, who's a bit further behind in the run, so still might get there.
Narninian, just wait
Oh,
till you
and we
see
got
Penguin later. Penguin is a shard taking machine. He just refuses to pass
so
any shards.
Heart having to restart, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised by a restart from his deck. He seems to have one of the quickest setups of any of the players with this Apex Imp. So it looks like Rising Dust did end up opting for the Grovel. I still like that pick. I think that's a
Yeah,
lot more of what you need to deal with relentless fights or just keep your waves alive in general, especially
it's
since
good
he's not on
sustain
Immortal
if you
Trade.
have superfood.
Yeah.
Yeah, since you have superfood, it's good sustain. It lets you set up on the top floor in Divinity if you want to. Um, because you have plenty of damage potential here, so really sustain is what you need.
I think Dusk has been explaining, on top of just destroying last round, he's displaying very good game knowledge here, understanding this Shadow Eater setup. I mean, look at how big that thing has grown just by eating morsels, not
Yeah,
even for damage.
and Dusk, in the private beta, certainly has a lot of game knowledge.
You have this class of players that understands the game, through like iteration, playing a lot, but also just having a good sense for card games and mechanics and fundamentals. But Dusk seems to be one of those players that really just puts the hours into Monster Train to understand it.
Interestingly, you see him going for playing 2 torches over the penance, which was kind of bizarre to me. I'm not sure I
So
understand that.
he has the pyre wall up here, and he's not going to recycle into the penance if he gets a bottom floor kill, and even if he does recycle into it later on, he's on a wretch plan here. Also, his deck is really really thick thanks to all these morsels that he's left in from the
So
previous
Peanut
wretches.
Jack having to restart. Was that the same person who just had to restart? Yeah. All right. So was that wasn't quite a flying kill, but it was a bottom floor kill from Ring 6, flawless victory for Rising Dusk.
Yeah, a very interesting transition with that combo and that Shadow Eater, allowing it to soften up waves with its trigger early on, but then transition to a relentless machine later on.
So we got a Ring 7 flawless victory from Ka. Ka is really coming back from a rough start, although he did have to restart on 2 fights. So
He now has to look at a second copy of Shroud Spike. Pretty interesting. I kind of like the redundancy here because I don't think he's going to have a lot of room to pick up like consumption removal and holdover or intrinsic. And also just having extra copies of some of your really important spells lets you get them earlier on. He decides to not opt for that one. Also passes up on another copy of important work.
Heart dealing with one of the downsides of Cheater's Hand, which is he has a holdover card that gives him draw. So it's Cheater's Hand basically does nothing, and it just slows him down.
Yeah, the time issue here, not as big of a deal for these players, but that's mainly, we just haven't encountered as many hiccups. weirdly enough, this run seems a little more punishing than the last one, but players struggling a lot less.
Well, it is the winner's bracket. So Hart just finishes rank 7, flawless victory.
Man, I love this Alpha Fiend on Shadow Eater. That thing.
You're really fascinated, huh?
See, I already knew about this interaction, but I just how fast that scales up, and how it's the fact that the thing that you're investing to build this busted unit on your lower floor isn't actually anything that's costing you. Like, you already would have just tossed Shadow Eater on a lower floor to soften up waves and thrown morsels behind him. It's really zero opportunity cost for a massive payoff.
Yeah.
Now we see the historian event here. I guess it's not historian, but it is the historian. But it's the gold based event. Not as relevant now that we're not playing for gold. There's no insane things where you can try to set up, a massive gift of gratitude or.
I mean, gift of gratitude has the benefit of, you just play it once to get its full benefit. So even though it's ring 7, you can still get some gold from it.
Yeah, I also like the gift here, given how many of these players are on Perils of Production setups. Not super reliable, but if you can line those two things up, that'll actually give you an insane amount of gold. And honestly, Rising Dusk here, going in with like a slight gold deficit.
Yeah.
All of these players pretty low.
Full cost Ritual of Battle still.
Yeah, not exactly where you want to be. I don't think he saw a value stone. I'm going to say I think Rising Dusk is in an interesting position. He has a lot of strong synergies, but vote for best kill floor here probably still goes to Heart's top floor setup with that Apex imp. That thing is a monster.
That's the strategy I probably would have focused on. I don't know if he's full superfood or what as far as the champ goes, but I like that a lot. Yeah, but Rising Dusk is the only player that hasn't had to restart yet.
Yeah, he's played very consistently throughout this tournament so far. I think
he did.
Good.
Yeah, he did have to restart in the first leg, but it was until ring 8, I believe.
I think we're going to see some interesting issues when we go to the make or break round next round. Honestly, like you wouldn't think about there being too much of a psychological game in Monster Train, but when you're playing at a fast pace, when you're playing against the clock, a lot of those things can stick with you and start to bug you. And I think players can get a little bit shaken by having to, like encounter these restarts or encounter like really heavy adversity early on. And that'll stick with you going throughout the tournament. Might make you play a little slower or a little faster, depending on what your specific issue was.
Yep.
I'm curious to see how that taxes people.
And people might be overreaching, trying to get the shard bonus, depending on how their last match went, whether it was a strong one or a hard one.
Now, I don't know what the over-under is on, do we expect a player to accidentally not get enough shards? Obviously, you still have strong potential to win without fighting Divinity. In fact, given the time crunch that we saw in last round, I won't be surprised if people win just by beating Seraph. But it'll still definitely feel like an accident to a lot of players if they end up not getting enough shards or not having the ability to get enough shards in the last ring.
I could see that happening, not in this run, though. Everyone has plenty of shards. Rising Dusk, the only one below 100, and he's only on he's on ring 7, so he still has another shot.
Yeah, also plenty of time to kind of slow down here a little bit and be a bit more methodical. Though it's tough to say how much players are paying attention to the clock. Just given that like looking over at the clock is the thing that can cost you a lot of time if you're being too worried about it. So it might be tough to even realize that you're in a situation where you can slow down. Oh, wow. Look at all of the pieces that could have been put together here. The Forever Flame, the Double Summons, the Pyre Chomper, the Unbroken Horn, the Umbra Spikes. There was definitely an insane deck here. But no one ended up on it. I mean, obviously, it's a tough thing to see, and we have the benefit of seeing all the runs here. Dusk thinking about Gift of Gratitude and taking a massive amount of self mutilations and leak damage because of it. Oh no, he's avoiding the leak still. Interesting.
Okay, so how we just have Ka finishing ring 8 with a no damage. So that's nice. And he's got a good number of shards, 170 shards.
Yeah, that was kind of the area that I think it was you and Nate were talking about ending up in a lot at the end of these runs, right? Was somewhere in like the 150 to 200.
I usually end up around 100. So we got a flawless heart victory for ring 8.
That's nice. Yeah, again, I think he has a really insane first cycle setup, which is extremely important against Divinity, or extremely important with the release of Last Divinity. Just having your first wave be really powerful. So I'm curious to see how the Divinity fight plays out. Heart not with an insane amount of pre-clear or an insane number of individual strikes. He does have the Furnace Tap, but and he does have a pretty lean deck, actually. He has a more lean deck than anyone. He's really the only person on a small deck here. Starting at 19 cards. I like the consistency, especially when the things that you're doing are this powerful. It's like we have a lot of players trying to trim down their decks. Kachua not in a position where he could set himself up for top floor. He didn't end up on the grovel. And even players who end up on the grovel would have to see it super early. So going to be capacity constrained.
There's a pretty large gap in number of shards, and I think that's going to be a bigger impact to the score than like having flawless victories is, because of the difference.
So I'm actually curious about some of these sustain plans. A lot of health on the alloy construct of Peanut Jack here, but not so much on some of the other players. And yeah, you see on the bottom left of your screen, Kachua here losing his kill floor to Divinity. So the big problem is you're forced to play middle because you can't play top against the sweep, and middle with that multi-strike scales up really fast with the extra shard level. For every extra 10 shards you have beyond 100, Divinity gets extra attack, and middle is the multi-strike floor. So even if you have some kind of lifesteal plan or some kind of damage shield plan, can you get yourself into a position where you're not just losing your wave to a single attack? Kachua not going to even try to restart here. I think he's seen the writing on the wall. There's no way to just sustain his alloyed construct through those first couple of turns.
So Hart in a better position than him, even if he doesn't complete the run.
Yeah, this Welder Helper Essence allowing him to keep Primordium alive and play top floor. Also meaning that his shard level isn't as relevant. Obviously, you still get damage scaling on Divinity on top floor as well, because it sweeps to apply that damage to more individual things. But as long as you're keeping Primordium armored up to any extent, that damage that's dealt to Primordium doesn't matter as much. So you don't have to worry as much about the damage that's being dealt to your frontliner on top floor as opposed to middle floor. In this case, the Apex Imp not taking a whole lot from Divinity. Though his armor scaling is so massive, it really didn't matter. Now it's really just a matter of how good is his pre-clear. He is the player that ended up on a lot of enhanced plinks, which are going to be pretty awkward in the Divinity fight in a way that they aren't in any other fights.
I didn't catch whether Rising Dusk had a flawless Ring 7 victory, so I'll have to double check on that.
So Heart's deck having no problem with the enhanced mini boss here. Actually just able to sweep it up with damage very, very cleanly.
It's getting a flying kill.
Yeah, that Apex setup was no joke. I think he stumbled a little bit early on, which might give him problems in points, but with Rising Dusk having some problem in the later rings, I think Hart might have shot ahead.
Yeah, Hart is in a commanding lead here, mainly because he has way more shards.
Yeah, that extra threat level bonus in the last ring can make a pretty big difference. Also, the flying kill is definitely nothing to scoff at, and I don't think Rising Dusk is going to have great potential for that. Rising Dusk has a much better setup for his Relentless fight, but his actual burst damage is not amazing. Now, Peanut Jack over here with an insane amount of health, and he got his setup online. It looks like he's going to be fine against Seraph. So it's just a matter of how fast can he get set up against Divinity. And I don't know if Peanut Jack is on a game plan where he can really afford to play top floor. He can keep Primordium alive for a while thanks to the 2 damage shields from the Chain of Gems. So he might be able to play top, but then you only get 1 morsel a turn that you can keep alive with the Chain of Gems. I don't know if he's going to have enough going on there. And he does have a Light of Seraph. So that 1 extra capacity might make it so he can play middle floor. It's just a bit of a tight squeeze.
It's going to be tight. It's going to be tight. Hart has commanding lead as far as the score goes. Could Kachua has a decent score just by fact that they had so many shards. So they'll need to get a flawless victory or a flying kill to catch up.
I think we see a very interesting issue here, which is players getting this sense that they can play top floor now, which is the thing that wasn't exactly available in high level play before, but end up being caught off guard by the way Divinity plays against top floor and just how unique that is, as opposed to just being kind of a raw damage type thing. Forcing them to shift likely into middle floor, like we saw with Kachua earlier, for just the last fight can mess up every calculation that you've made in terms of how much space you have and what you can do with that space.
Yeah, and a big part of the game plan is figuring out how you can keep your backliners alive if you do want to go with that extra space.
Yeah, a lot of things incidentally end up with much higher priority, given not only Divinity sweep on top floor, but also all the spikes around. It's really tough to keep Primordium alive. You have to have a designated game plan for doing so. It's very similar to dealing with Seraph the Patient.
Okay, so Peanut Jack getting a flawless ring 8.
Yeah, he got that bottom floor kill with just the thickest Alpha Fiend in the world. I think he's on the Shadow Siege Enhanced Alpha Fiend. That thing is a monster. Yeah, look at all those pips. So let's see how Peanut Jack sets up his 2 floors here. Yeah, it looks like he's going to go for middle, so he's not going to have space for extra food on Alloy Construct. We're just going to keep it pretty starved early. It's also not like he's going to be able to do a lot with the morsels on Alpha Fiend here. Some of them are definitely non-zero, especially Damage Shield here. But I think he's going to have a problem with distributing his food early.
Yeah. For the greater good.
So obviously that's another card that makes capacity a little tight, but at least the initial burst of defense would be fine. The problem is enemies being shard enhanced here, you can't actually take those. Oh no, did they? Oh, so now it's... Oh, did they change that so you can take them now? Yeah. Apparently I missed that one. I've actually not encountered the For the Greater Good event once since Divinity came out.
Oh, dang.
It's a shame. I love the card. I even had like a whole segment.
Card. I don't think it's usually that powerful. Can be, but It's fun.
I like the Light's Gift here for Rising Dusk. Gonna help him with waves a lot. Not amazing against Divinity, but really, really strong defensive plan early on. Only requires a tiny bit of scaling to set yourself up for a relentless fight. And if you're doing enough damage with this deranged brute, you don't really even need to be worried about it at all. You don't take any hits from the waves, from the initial waves as they come up, and then you just kill whatever floating boss you're fighting in 1 or 2 hits. Still not gonna do that much against Divinity though. But I think Light's Gift is a slightly underrated relic.
I like it a lot. I mean, okay, so he gets a clean ring 8 kill, which is certainly going to help his odds a bit. It's very tight. I mean, if he completes this run, he gets in above Kachua and Peanut Jack.
Kachua out here analyzing Heart's run to see how he ended up.
All right, so a death from Peanut Jack.
Died to enhanced mini boss. Just couldn't get enough burst damage out. A real problem.
So it really comes down to Rising Dusk completing this. He has to beat it to win because of the massive shard difference.
So where does that put the other two relative to each other? I'm assuming Heart is in the lead.
Heart has a commanding lead. He's guaranteed to move on. Peanut Jack is in the back. Kachua just had so many more shards that he pulled out ahead. And then on the fence are Rising Dusk and Kachua. So Rising Dusk is restarting here, which means he's out, I believe. Unless he doesn't. No, he's restarting, so he's not going to get any points for this ring, which means he's 1 point behind, if I'm understanding correctly. So he's going to be out.